I'm not really sure where to begin with the situation and how it has affected me. I've struggled with trying to understand that none of what has happened was my fault. When it all first happened, I felt like pieces of me were stolen. My innocence and my self-worth. My self-worth was destroyed in those moments, and almost 3 years later, I'm still trying to repair something I didn't break. I feel like I can't talk to anybody about it because they can never understand how I'm feeling. Everyone tells me that I survived, and I did, but at what cost? My friendships with the people I'm close with were affected so severely, it's hard for me to be around them anymore. My relationship with people in my own family were also affected. My relationship with my siblings, I pushed them away from me during this time, and I still feel bad about it because I didn't do anything to deserve that. It's hard for me to hug my own father, grandfather, and uncles because all I can feel are his hands on me. As much as I want to be able to talk to my mother and father about what's happened, it's just too hard for me because the looks on their faces kill me inside. It hurts that my parents feel like they are the ones who should take the blame for this. A home is where you're supposed to feel safe, but because the situation occurred in my home, I no longer have that sense of security there. I struggle a lot with being able to sleep peacefully at night because I'll have nightmares about it that wake me up throughout the night. During the time this occurred, I was only 13 years old. I didn't tell anyone for almost a month what had happened to me. I was scared people wouldn't believe me. I was also about to start 8th grade, and I had been so excited I didn't want anything to get in the way of ruining my school year. School in general, since this has happened, has been extremely difficult for me. My grades suffer due to my mental health. I missed many days of school because I had become so depressed it was difficult for me to even get out of bed. And while at school, all I could think about was what had happened, and I would have to leave class often to calm myself down. I still struggle with this to this day. I had felt so lost and alone after it happened, I resorted to coping mechanisms that were hurting my own body. I remember during the moments while it was happening, I so badly wanted to scream, kick, or do something to stop it, but my body and my mind were so frozen with fear and confusion I couldn't speak or move. This man had been such a close person to me at the time, and to figure out he had only been wanting to become close to me to do those things to me really hurt me. I felt so betrayed and used. I felt disgusting after it happened. I can still remember showering afterwards and trying so hard to scrub his hands off me. My relationship with God and my religion were wounded. I had and have a hard time going to church after it happened because I just didn't understand why what happened to me had to happen to me. A few people at school and at other schools had found out what had happened to me, and I would have strangers calling me and asking me what happened to me. Having random strangers call you and asking about something so traumatic that happened to you is traumatic itself, because I felt like now only everyone knew me for one thing, and for a while I had let that define me. So sometimes it feels like that's the only thing that does define me. Another thing that was hard was having to go on stand in front of strangers and go into detail about what happened. I felt so vulnerable and wanted to cry the whole time, but I also didn't want to express my emotion in the fear that I might mess something up. It was also so difficult not being able to have my own mom in the courtroom during one of my court dates. It was also hard when both of my parents were in the room, because it felt so much harder to talk about what had happened to me with them there, because even they didn't know every single detail until I went up on stand. The looks in their faces as I would have to go into excruciating detail each night of what he did to me made me want to cry. I look back on what happened to me during that time to remember that I was only a child and he was a grown man. I was taken advantage of and used. After it happened, I had a feeling that I just needed to grow up faster so the trauma would maybe be easier to deal with if I had had the mindset of an adult. I wouldn't wish this upon anyone. It is truly so traumatic. It is something I have to deal with for the rest of my life. Because someday I might be able to heal from this, but I will never forget. And my 13-year-old self will always be in the back of my mind from when I would lay on my bedroom floor crying and screaming into pillows. Or from when I would be crying in the bathroom at school because I had kids asking me what happened. Or from when the boys in my grade would text me asking if it felt good. Those are just a small portion of everything I was feeling, had, and have to go through, and it was horrible. It is weird to think that my entire life was altered in the span of a few minutes. Writing this paper was even hard because it still affects me sometimes in ways I don't even know yet until it's happening. I also feel like going offense to 80 isn't enough. The amount of stress all this has caused me is insane. I feel like I have to walk on eggshells around myself. I have to watch what I do, what conversation I choose to listen on or be a part of because it sometimes still triggers me. Overall, the pain I suffered is irreversible, but I hope one day to heal from it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate those comments. Are you satisfied with the representation of your attorney up to this point?
No.
Is there any counsel, is there any legal reason why I should not sentence the defendant today?
No.
Crime of lewd conduct is minor under the age of 16. I have carefully reviewed the record in this matter. I have reviewed both the pre-sentence investigation report as well as the psychosexual evaluation. I have listened to the statements of the victim impact statements that were given. I was the judge also that conducted the trial. I have listened to the argument of the state and have considered the objectives of criminal sentencing adopted by the Idaho Supreme Court. Those are objectives this court must consider. If that's of the case of the state versus Toohill, in that case, I must consider protection of society, deterrence, rehabilitation, and punishment. I've also carefully considered the criteria out of Code 1925-21 relative to the question whether I should place you on probation or confine you to prison. In this case, this court, even though the defense has chosen not to present mitigating factors, the court has done so, and I will make comments on those both aggravating and mitigating factors in this case. Perhaps I'm going to address the aggravating factors first. Both the victim impact statements of mother and the victim in this case talked about stolen innocence. That's exactly what this case is about, in the fact that Mr. Cady stole the innocence of a 13-year-old girl in a way that he took advantage of, Mr. Cady took advantage of the victim in this case in a sexual manner, and that those actions have caused consequences. Consequences both to the family. They talk about how kindness has become a weakness. They felt that they would be kind to you and that you took advantage of that kindness and sexually assaulted their 13-year-old daughter. The jury listened to the evidence and found you guilty of the crime. I recognize the comments that you have made, both on the stand and in the psychosexual evaluation, as well as the pre-sentence investigation report, that you were unaware that she was doing these things and that you were unaware, and then when she grabbed your penis, that you brushed it off and tried not to deal with that. The fact of the matter is, even if that were to happen, you didn't handle things appropriately. In that case, you should have handled it differently than you did, and you chose not to. Of concern to this court, like I said, I think the victims as well have touched on the trauma and the effect on their life. The court has to consider that, as well as have to consider the protection of society. In the pre-sentence investigation report, it talks about, I'm going to read the paragraph on page 10 of that report. It says, Mr. Cady was interviewed on July 1st at the Bonneville County Jail. Was upset about the outcome of the jury trial, felt that all items of evidence proving my innocence were not presented. Mr. Cady focused on how unfair the trial was and his lack of participation in sexual acts towards the victim. In the psychosexual report, it indicated that the amenability for treatment was very poor. Mr. Cady perceives himself to be the victim in this case, which is consistent with his self-report regarding prior failed intimate relationships. Since it is unlikely he will effectively engage in any treatment recommended, that avenue of reducing his risk of reoffense appears to be closed at this time. The victim has suffered from lack of self-worth, loss of innocence, and trust in relationships. She hopes to one day heal from the trauma, however, stated, I will never forget. The defendant's lack of accountability combined with his anger and frustration over the situation creates cause for concern over the risk he presents to others and his ability to be supervised effectively. Therefore, we respectfully recommend the defendant be sentenced to a term of incarceration with the Department of Corrections. So the pre-sentence investigator recommends incarceration. The state has recommended a series of incarceration either. Would note in this Mr. Cady a lack of much of a criminal history. There have been some minor offenses. Would note that it appears that the only conviction prior to this was a charge out of Nevada, which was a misdemeanor. Everything else, I think this is your first felony other than that, at least from my reading of the prior record comments. The court only considers that, and so really this would be a first offense. We would also note that in reviewing the psychosexual evaluation that you passed the polygraph examinations. There was 2 of those, and that it showed that when asked the questions, and I read through the detailed questions that were asked, that you passed those polygraph examinations. The court, however, is required to consider the verdict of the jury in this case, where a jury of 12 found you guilty of the crime. So then the court has to consider protection of society and your rehabilitation. Of concern as to that, on page 19 of the psychosexual evaluation, it says this conviction appears to be the product of a pattern of sorts in Mr. Cady's life, wherein he attempts to help women with various problems and ends up being victimized by them from his perspective. On page 24 of the psychosexual evaluation are the comments where it talks about a moderate risk level, and ultimately on page 25 where it talks about treatment. It says Mr. Cady is likely to be a very challenging client for treatment. For treatment providers regarding sexual offender treatment as noted above. He displays a high level of interpersonal dominance and anger frustration at the present time. The undersigned anticipates that successful treatment could only occur in a setting in which the treatment provider builds a strong therapeutic relationship with him prior to moving forward. Mr. Cady's perception and understanding of himself is essentially a virtuous person who gets in trouble because of his well-intentioned actions, while possible, appears to be largely productive of personality disorder traits. As such, he will require a high degree of supervision of the community and will be a very challenging individual to supervise. This may change if he engages in treatment and his symptoms of depression are in remission. However, this seems unlikely at the present time. So based on all these factors, considering what it is the court should do in this case, it's going to be the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to the custody of the Department of Corrections as follows.
Your Honor,
Yes, Mr. Harris?
I apologize for
Go ahead.
the interruption. I just thought that prior to that, I did note there was an error in the PSI that
Where?
on page 6.
What is it?
At accommodation, the last bullet point says defendant has been in custody at Bonneville County Jail since May 12th of 2023. I reviewed that. I believe that that is an error. It would have been May 15th of 2024. I think prior to that time he was released.
Okay.
In custody.
We'll go ahead and make that correction. Mr. Cady will ultimately given the credit time for time served, because I know he was both in and out and released. He will be given the credit based upon that. And Mr. Cady, just so you know, if there, once you get those records, if it's not an accurate account, you can contact Mr. Gustavus and he can file a motion with this court if those dates are not appropriately given to you.
The defense counsel would concur with what the state has pointed out. He was arrested and posted bond, so he had credit for time of 1 day. He was then taken into custody after the trial. So,
Appreciate that. Anything else, Mr. Harris?
No, Your Honor.
All right. So based on all these factors, considering the criteria we've already set forth in this case, giving the judgment of this court, should be sentenced to custody of the Department of Corrections as follows: for a minimum term of 10 years, followed by an indeterminate term of 30 years for a total of 40 years. I'm going to order a fine in this case of $1,000. Standard court costs, payments into the Victims Relief Fund. I do find that you're indigent. However, the court then, based on that, will not order the $2,000 restitution, as I don't think, based on the sentence I've given you, that you're going to be in a position to make those payments. I am, however, going to order reimbursement of the County Public Defender Service amount of $500, as I believe that that is something that you will eventually may be able to repay. I will also order that you register as a sex offender upon your release pursuant to Iowa Code 188307. And I extend a no contact order for a period of 40 years, which is the sentence that I've given in this case. You'll have no contact with the family or specifically the victim in this case. We'll give you credit for the time that you've served up to now. Your counsel's indicated, I believe that was approximately 100 days. Has indicated if those dates aren't correct, once you receive those times, you can ask to have that corrected in this court. Let me advise you of the right to appeal. You have a Supreme Court from this judgment conviction. You have a right to represent a binding attorney in that appeal. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you public expense. However, you only have 42 days for the days to file that. You also have the right to seek relief under Idaho Criminal Rule 35 if you feel the sentence was illegal or unduly harsh. You have 120 days for that. You also have the right to seek relief under the Idaho Uniform Post-Conviction Relief Act. Such an action was filed within 1 year from the date that your right to appeal expires. I'm also going to order the collection of a DNA sample and a right thumbprint consistent with Idaho Code. If you have any questions about those rights, speak with Mr. Gustavus. You can also do that. But if you have any questions, sir, about your rights as far as your right to appeal or post-conviction. All right. Anything else to on this matter, Mr. Gustavus?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Harris?
No, Your Honor.
We're going to order the collection of the pre-sentence investigation reports, and that will be in recess on this matter.